You're gonna lay down right at my feet? Okay, good girl, good girl. All right, welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. That's Holly, the dog down below, who's been in tons and tons of videos on the channel. I think she's just gonna lay right there at my feet, which is a good spot for her. Today, this is the question and answer video that I do most Sundays. You can ask gardening questions down below, and I pick from those each week to answer. Had a lot of questions last week. Again, I think there's 19 or 20 that I have picked out. I mentioned the join button down below the video last week, and a lot of people can't see the join button, and then I looked up, apparently Apple blocks the join button, so if you're part of the Apple cult, then that's why you can't see it. But I've actually linked it down below the video if you're interested. It's not anything, but I do hold a once a month, trying to hold a once a month Zoom meeting with those folks and just ask questions in a round table, until, for an hour or so every month. So anyway, again, not asking for anything, but it's there if you want to. Okay, let's see. We just got back from a trip. We went down to Georgia, spent most of the time in Georgia. We went to 5 nurseries total. Mr. Maple, McCorkle Nursery and Dudley's, which are near Augusta, Georgia, and then went to Balcomb's and Latham's Nursery, which are near Charlotte, North Carolina. Then we went over to the Cox Arboretum. That's where last week's question and answer was. I still haven't put up the video from that. You'll see that probably on Monday, probably the day after you see this one. I just haven't had a chance to sit down and edit that one yet. And I went over to Ram's and Tom's Gebberson's garden over in Athens, Georgia. And I have put that video up, if you've seen that. And then what was the other? There's probably some other video that I put up. Oh, I put up a tour video from Jeremy Schmitz that I had shot about a week and a half before that, and his incredible rock work over there at his garden. So that's gone up. And then, so there's the trip. And other things, I have 2 giant boxes of bulbs, and you guys will see that have greeted me back returning home. And so all the bulbs have to be planted. There's actually some bulbs going in other people's gardens around the neighborhood. It's a lot of bulbs, all stuff that Color Blend sent me. So we'll see that this next week or the week after, sometime coming up. Okay, so let's get to some questions from last week's video. Somebody asked when to move a plant versus just pruning it. Like, at what point would I relocate it instead of being able to prune it and keep it there? I think the answer to that is always, is it doing damage to something else, or is it being damaged by something else? So as I'm looking around this garden as it's filling in, I can see that there's a couple things here that no matter how much pruning I do, by midsummer or late summer, it's going to damage the plant. An example of that is there's a calicarpa, a white berrying calicarpa. If you've watched the tour videos, it's still fully white out there. Looks fantastic. It was planted close to a boxwood, and that boxwood is forever going to be in the shadow of that thing. So I think I need to move that boxwood that's out there. It's a baby gem boxwood, because I have to let that calicarpa get a certain size during the summer in order to flower and fruit. And so really don't have any option on that one. If I can prune it, get away with pruning something a couple times during the season to free it up here or there, then I'll do the pruning. But if in order to have the plant do what it's supposed to do, is it going to damage another plant or be damaged by another plant? That's when I would move it. Again, I'm planting things in here pretty tight, so there's going to be a few move arounds and probably some disposal, honestly, of a couple things ultimately. Somebody asked about small conifers. They were wanting to do conifers, but they have a dog that pees on everything, and wanted to know which ones are, kind of pea resistant. I know yews are, and most pines. So if you like something, some sort of dwarf pine, we have a few dwarf pines, and we just got one more. So there's going to be an upcoming video on some things we got from Mr. Maple from the conifer video. I brought home 4 or 5 conifers from that, a couple Japanese maples, and other things that we got in other places that you guys will see as well. But most of the dwarf pines, any pines, are pretty salt tolerant or urine resistant. And then junipers. And I read that blue spruces are, but I don't have enough experience with blue spruce here in North Carolina. I mean, I have a blue spruce, and we can grow spruces here, but it's not like they're all over the place like they are in the Northeast. So somebody else in the Northeast could answer to that, is if their dogs do damage to them by peeing on them, because I really don't know. But again, it's one of those things that I've heard, don't know. And then, and of course the internet can be pretty broken, so an eyewitness account is probably better. If you have a dog that lifts its leg on everything, you would be the most helpful person, not the internet. And then definitely stay away from arborvitae. I Googled this, just to make sure I was right about using pines and junipers. And arborvitae were on the list. And I mean, Griffin hit one out here. He's hit it 2 times. I've tried to keep him away from it, and immediately was just had this giant black spot in it. So there's no way those things are urine resistant. I mean, maybe once more established, or maybe after they've limbed themselves up some, but they are not overall urine resistant at all. The wind is blowing like crazy here. We've got that hurricane is going through western North Carolina right now, and anytime you're on the east side of one, you're in the area where you can get tornadoes. We've had a couple tornado warnings or watches, and a warning back toward Durham today. We've gotten a little bit of rain out of it, but not much. We were on the west side of Ian when Ian came through and got a little bit of rain, and now we're on the east side of this one getting a little bit of rain, but it looks like it's going to the Ohio Valley and they need rain. Everybody needs rain, so whoever's getting it, great. So we all need rain right now. Okay, so somebody asked if they're making leaf mold, which is basically means they're piling their leaves up until they rot some. They wanted to know if it would help eliminate some of their peat moss usage so they can replace peat moss in their containers or whatever. Yes, absolutely. I had a friend who's actually still at the Raleigh Farmers Market, grows a lot of herbs at the Raleigh Farmers Market. He, post-recession, when a lot of nurserymen were thin on money, he started going and getting the leaf mold from Raleigh and was doing all of his herbs in the, just in the rotted leaves, and they looked better than anybody else's herbs. So yes, absolutely. I should probably show that on the channel at some point, because it is something I know. Just semi-broken down leaves work great in pots, and just as a break with you can mix pine bark in with it. You can mix perlite in with it. You can mix whatever in with it. I probably wouldn't go all leaf mold because it can hold almost too much water. But yes, it's a great peat replacement for sure. And I've seen plants grew so well in it that they were almost rooted out of the containers in no time. So I would break it with some pine bark or something like that if you can find that. Let's see. Somebody bought a camellia in zone 7A, and it's one that's hardy in just 7 to 9. There are zone 6 hardy camellia hybrids if you want to be on the lookout for those, but they're in zone 7A. Just bought it in Maryland. Want to know at what point they should just bring it inside into a cellar or something for the winter. At no point should you bring it inside and keep it there for the entire winter. Okay, you're going to need to take this thing in and out. Okay, if you're not, they don't want to plant it right now. They want to plant it in the spring, and that's probably, you could either plant it now and then plan on covering it with a sheet or a blanket on the nights that are, probably things below 20 in that first winter. I don't know how many nights you're going to have below 20. Maybe, this was in Maryland, zone 7A, maybe 10, the whole winter. So you could do that. You put it in the ground, plan on covering it, or just bring it in when the pot's going to freeze solid. So anything below 29 degrees or so, I would bring it in on that night, put it back out when it goes back above freezing the next day. If you had to leave it inside for 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, that's fine, but not for the whole winter. It's an evergreen shrub. It needs light. It needs sun, and so putting it away for the winter would not be beneficial to it unless you had some sort of lighting in that space. But in and out is what needs to happen if you're going to leave it in a container. Okay, somebody asked if hyacinths naturalize in zone 8A. There's probably somewhere in America that this answers yes, but definitely here in the southeast. I'm in zone 7B or 8A, and our hyacinths, if I can refrigerate them, plant them, they come up and bloom beautifully. The next year, they come back up, but they're slightly less vigorous, and then by year 3 or 4, they just kind of disappear. They're just not getting enough winter. They're not getting enough cold treatment on them. So typically not, but there might be somewhere that somebody is able to in 8A, but here in the southeast, probably not. It's probably not on the good bulbs for the south to naturalize list. Okay, somebody's got a rhododendron in 18 months in the ground and did not flower this past spring, and it has no buds on it now, because our rhododendrons, azaleas, you know, they have their flower buds on them, carrying them into winter, the same as a lot of plants, and they don't see any flower buds on them. So I have no way of answering these questions. This is one of those things where people will tell you you're over fertilizing it, maybe, and you're just pushing too much green growth on it. That's a possibility. This year, if I were to guess, I would say it probably was underwatered. I mean, most people, I don't know where this person even is, so I don't have any good information about, how much rain they had or, how much they're watering it or whatever, but it could have been too dry. Obviously, it could be too wet. The space could be too alkaline. They're definitely acid-loving plants, but typically that'll yellow the plant, so you would notice that outside of just not having flower buds. It'd also be off color if the soil was in too alkaline. One other thing is it could be in too much shade. There definitely is a limit. Even shade plants have a limit on how much shade they can take. So it's likely one of those things I just named. It's overwatered, underwatered, in too much shade. Too much sun won't be a problem. It'll just scald it, but I see rhododendrons in this neighborhood blooming fine and way more sun than I think that they would like. The plants look a little tough, but they bloom like crazy. So I don't think it's too much sun. And then again, being careful not to push our plants too much, because we can create lots of green growth by using high nitrogen fertilizers and not get a lot of flowers in return for that. We're guilty of that in the nursery business for sure, about just pushing the plant as fast as possible because you're trying to get it out as quick as possible, and you don't always get the most flowers that way. Some of the plants, it was always funny. Some azalea that had been ignored for a year and a half was just completely covered in flowers. Same thing with hydrangeas and things. You would see just the best flowering plants in the nursery were the dogs, and it's partly because they were a little bit lean and they weren't over fertilized. It's always kind of an interesting thing in the nursery. Let's see. Somebody has hydrangea, big leaf hydrangeas in pots for the winter, and I don't know. Maybe they said, I don't remember what zone they said they were in or if they did. Somebody else actually answered this question, that they have some in containers outside and they do fine. The main time we have to worry about, I got a hydrangea macrophylla over there it's budded up to bloom. It's got one sitting up right up on top of it, ready to bloom. We're getting a frost in a couple nights, so I don't think that'll happen, but I'm just noticed that I'm so easily distracted. The main time of year, as long as you're not like in zone 5, if you're in zone 5, your hydrangeas need to be in the ground, and they're probably big leaf hydrangeas that aren't remontant, meaning they don't repeat, they don't bloom on old and new wood, really do struggle in zone 5 to consistently flower on a year-to-year basis, just because the buds can actually freeze at a certain temperature, regardless of what I'm about to say. Down here in the south, our biggest issue with hydrangeas is actually that they wake up too early and the buds swell, and then we get a late frost or freeze. And so once that flower bud that new growth starts to initiate, that's when we can get our flower buds killed on them. So that's the time of year most likely that the damage is going to occur. But if you're in zone 6 or 7 or 8, I think you'll be fine with them outside through the winter. Just keep in mind though, protect them as they start to wake up in the spring. Yours should stay asleep a little bit longer in a container than they would in the ground. So, because the air temperature around it, the roots will stay cooler, so it's possible you might have less of a problem of that. But again, there's nothing that you want to leave outside that you want to keep the pot just frozen for days. So, if you get a spot during the winter time where the pot's just going to be frozen for 2 or 3 days straight, like it's going to be 20 degrees for a low and 31 degrees for a high, and then 18 degrees for a low and then 33 degrees for a high. You see that kind of thing on a forecast and you've got potted things outside, that's the time that they get hurt, because the pot just stays frozen that whole time 33, a high of 33, that's above freezing, right? Well, that was only 1 hour of the day that it was actually, or 2 hours of a very short day in the winter where it was above freezing. So those are the days I'm concerned about, that, those types of temperatures, and then the late winter frost. Enough words for that one. Somebody has a slender Hinoki cypress that's thinning. Doesn't matter whether it's a slender Hinoki cypress or whatever. Conifers thin this time of year. You're going to see some browning on the interior of your conifers. It's worse in years where it's drier going into fall, and that's definitely what we've had this year. They see pine trees all over the place that are just losing 50% of their needles because it's dry. It's so dry. They looked down at the base of it, and there were ants, fire ants or whatever kind of ants were at the base of it, and wanted to know if the ants had something to do with it. Yes, possibly the ants are creating even better drainage around the base of that plant. And so the ants aren't doing anything that ants just tunnel. And so that tunneling, I'm sure, is keeping the plant slightly drier overall. I would water it a few times, and I think the ants will probably get the point and move on if you're watering. I'm going to talk more about watering in a minute. I typically don't water right at the base of a plant. A plant with ants at the bottom of it, I'm probably going to water right at the base. All I'm going to tell the ants is, move on somewhere else. This is not the spot for you. But yes, the ants are probably potentially exacerbating what was already a very dry period of time, and a time of year when conifers thin anyway. Okay. Somebody lives in zone 9A in Florida, and a lot of the perennials in their box stores are marked zone 10. Do I think they'll be perennial for them? Not if you haven't, it totally depends. I think there's a lot of things that I call annuals in this landscape that are actually perennials. And so that African basil that I have out front, it's an annual for me. It's a zone 10 perennial. Some of the salvias, some of the more tropical salvias that we have in here are actually zone 10 perennials. So a lot of times you'll see at the bottom of a video, I'll put annual for me. And what that means is it's a zone 10 perennial. My guess is that we always just call them zone 10 perennials if we think it's tropical. Probably some of it's okay in 9, some of it isn't. And it always depends on your winter. Like for me last year, this yard was zone 9. The coldest temperature we got was zone 9. So I didn't have a zone 7B winter last year. I had a zone 9 winter. I imagine you in Florida and 9A probably had a zone 10 winter. And a lot of times then, if something survives that first winter and makes it into a second winter, develops a little wood on it, then it becomes perennial even in a zone colder than what people think it will grow in. And so, if I'm on the border of something like that, I'm probably going to go for it. If you see where you're going to get freezing temperatures, zone 10 plants typically don't like anything below freezing, really. You could go out and cover those plants the first winter. If you could get them through a winter, I don't know what we're talking about here, but if you can get a lot of it through the first winter, you're probably going to be fine with some of it, and some of it you won't. Let's see. But again, plants that I'll take a camellia and say they're zone 7 to 9 hardy. If I can get it through 2 winters in zone thick and in zone 6 and really develop a trunk on it, it's probably would be zone 6 hardy at that point. It's always that you got to get to 24 or 36 months before that would be possible, and that usually about every 3rd winter you're going to get a cold one, which would hurt that. Let's see. Somebody asked how close to plant plants in a cottage garden. It's always a tricky question. I plant the plants very close and just let them figure it out. I think that Erin, the impatient gardener, did that project that we talked about in her video this year, where a lot of those 1-gallon perennials went in 6 inches apart. And because of that, it filled in and it looked great in the first year. Some of them are going to play nice with some, and some of them are going to overrun others. And she just had swaths of different things, 10 or 12 or 15 of each of the different things. And they'll invade each other's space and they'll figure it out. That's how nature, I plant things close because I'm impatient, or if you had a small lot. If you have a large lot and you don't have a lot of money, you might plant them further apart or plant them close together and then divide them out into the surrounding space, dig them up and divide them. But this lot's so small, and you know, able to dig up and divide and propagate some things, and honestly get a few things for free because you guys watch the videos, and I'm able to, you know, go to a nursery and somebody, you know, gives us something. So, you know, thank you guys for that. But I try to do things inexpensively. And so when you're talking about, can I plant them, you know, really close, sometimes that increases the amount of money we're talking about. So, but yeah, I plant things really close and I let them figure it out. If again, from that very first question I answered here, if they're not figuring it out, if something's not playing nice with something else, you're free to move something later. You know, it might be 24 months later, especially with herbaceous perennials, they're easy to move, you know, move about the garden. So I think the answer is as close as you want and as close as your budget allows, or your, you know, the size of your garden allows. Okay. Somebody asked about, I talk about using leaves, and I actually need to come out here and at least blow the leaves off some of the places, the paths and things, but the leaves are going to lay in the beds through the winter. Somebody's got powdery mildew on their maple, wanted to know if they should just keep those leaves as well. Yeah, I would. I wouldn't worry about it. Some years it'll have it and some years it won't. There are some, you know, the spotting I have on my big leaf hydrangeas, I typically will go and rake those leaves away from my big leaf hydrangeas because I know it bounces back up, right back up on the plant. You know, on a maple tree, you know, I don't think anything's bouncing back up from the ground, back up onto the foliage, but you may get powdery mildew there every year just because it's in a space where the leaves aren't drying out well, or the plant's under some sort of stress. You know, I talk about that frequently. You know, if you're getting, a lot of times these disease or insect problems are secondary issues. And so, you know, ask yourself as you're looking at that maple, if I got it in a lawn with only this much space, you know, or is, you know, it probably would like to be in a big bed. It probably would like to be, honestly, underplanted with some other things. That's how it would be out in nature. Is it, you know, is it getting too dry at times during the year and maybe needs a little bit of supplemental water? You know, ask yourself why that tree is, there's some sort of stress likely that's allowing it to be vulnerable to mildew, especially late in the season. Okay, somebody asked about fertilizing on top of on the top of their mulch. There are bags of fertilizer that tell you to pull the mulch back and fertilize and then put the mulch back. You'll always see me throwing it right out over top of the mulch. I am not doing that. Okay, so I can give you all the reasons I'm using mulch. The mulch is breaking down, feeding the plants with nutrients. It's holding in moisture. It's regulating soil temperature. In the summer, it's keeping it cool. In the winter, it's keeping it warm. Yada, 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 yada. I'll tell you 1,000 reasons. The number one reason I use mulch is because I don't want weeds. If I pull that mulch back and I fertilize and I push that mulch back, I guarantee you I just brought weed seeds to the top. The time of year I'm fertilizing is in March, and every one of those weed seeds is going to germinate because that's the time of year they do, in March and April. And so there is no way I'm breaking my mulch barrier to fertilize. So y'all can take that off the bag. Any fertilizer manufacturer anywhere, please take that off the bag. You're going to go from, okay, I most efficiently used my fertilizer, to that person hating gardening, okay, because so many weeds are going to come up. That's literally what's going to happen. If I went around and pulled the mulch back from every plant here, because again, flipping any soil over, every teaspoon of soil has thousands of weed seeds in it. And so anytime it gets exposed, weeds are going to come up. Of course, weeds are coming anyway. We all know that. But why invite an entire garden full of weeds based on a fertilizer instruction? No way. Okay, somebody's got a touch of gold holly and a fire chief arborvitae, and they're in zone 6 in pots. They want to know what to do with them for the winter. Well, that touch of gold holly is the one that's really vulnerable. It is zone 6 hardy, but that's Hugendorn hollies, but I think that one's the one that's going to need the protection. The fire chief arborvitae is very cold hardy. It can probably stay out in the pot even through those freezes I was talking about earlier. It's a Thuja occidentalis, which are actually native to north of Pennsylvania. Like, they're not even native in Pennsylvania. They're native to Canada. So we're talking about probably something, I think there's zone 4 or something on the tag. It wouldn't surprise me if they're hardy in zone 3. So that one's the least of our concerns. But the Touch of gold holly, you're marginal for it. So that's one that I would leave out when it's above freezing, bring in when it's well below freezing for the winter, or have some sort of sheet you can put over it on night. Again, anything below, 28 or so like that. If it's above ground and the roots are exposed, I'm probably going to tote it in. That's the one to worry about, not the arborvitae. Okay, somebody has a big hole from a stump and they want to fill it. And everybody knows the best thing to do is fill a hole with native soil. Because if you fill a depression, if I had a big hole here where this grass area is, and it rained, it rained earlier today, there'd be standing water in it right now. She's getting up here. What you gonna do, huh? They want to know, so here's what I did on every landscape job I ever had where there was a big giant hole in the yard, and we had a lot of these because we would pull plants out all the time, is we actually took a tiller and tilled the surrounding area around it and pulled back with the tiller. So you till some and then you pull back with the tiller and actually use the tiller to bring some of your native soil in the surrounding area into that hole. And that's the way we did it. We basically feathered the material that was around it back into it, and that worked really, really well. And then from there we used organic material on that whole space. We had just done that too. But I always, literally 100% of the time, that's what I did. I took the surrounding soil, but if you use a tiller to do this, it's actually pretty easy because you just till about 3 feet out from the hole, and then you pull on the two handles for the tiller, and it brings that soil that it just broke up back to where you're standing. So just back up into the hole and just let it bring it in. So a little electric tiller like I list down below in my Amazon store is perfectly adequate for this. And that way I just feather the area, as much native soil back into that hole as I can. And then I mix organic material into the whole bigger. Now I've created a bigger area to work on. This wind is really blowing. But that's how I do that. It's the best, and hopefully those instructions make sense. You could do it with a shovel, obviously, but a little electric tiller or a gas tiller makes quick work of feathering a space like that. Okay, somebody says they have, some of their beds are smelly at times. And so, generally speaking, soil should smell kind of earthy. I mean, you'll see people, picking up soil and smelling it and stuff. Really, I don't know that they get anything out of that other than it's not funky. If it's funky, it's got some sort of anaerobic activity happening, and anaerobic activity is just bad bacteria and bad fungi rather than good bacteria and good fungi. That's what happens when soil comes waterlogged. So I'm wondering, is it possible, are you overwatering to get those anaerobic conditions? Or do you have root rot in some of the plants that are in those beds where things decline rapidly? Usually when you have root rot, like the plant just goes and dies, or at least one branch, boom, 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 pretty quick when they lose their roots. And so I wonder if it's a bed that's just too wet. That's the only thing I can think of as to why it would smell bad frequently. Somebody asked if they can use wilt stop for winter protection or winter burn on their boxwoods. So they're like up in zone 4 or 5 or something like that, and in the winter the ground freezes solid, and the boxwood can't get any water up into the top to help itself, and then the wind blows across it and one side of them will burn. And you'll see this pretty frequently. A lot of plants will do this. Boxwood's pretty bad for it though. And they want to use wilt stop. Wilt stop is just pine oil that you can spray on it. Yeah, absolutely. Wilt stop works great. It's pretty widely used for a lot of different things, but this is one thing you can use for it. It's called wilt stop, and again, it's just pine oil, and it basically, you spray the plant until it kind of runs off of it, and until it's fully saturates all the leaves on it, and that helps with that wind blowing across them. Puts a little barrier between the wind and the moisture that's in the boxwood leaf. Somebody asked if we plan on going to Texas to do any filming. Yes, I think next year we're going to film in Texas. We're filming in the Northeast for a period of time. Next summer, we're filming in the Southeast earlier in the year, and then we plan on going out to the West next fall. And so that's kind of the plan right now, and we're you know, like I've got a schedule for the Atlanta Botanic Garden. We're doing the Atlanta Botanic Garden next year, which I can't believe, and I can't wait. And lots of things like that that are scheduled or in the process of scheduling, or I'm emailing with somebody right now. So once I know that schedule better, I think next year I want to do some meetups. I want to find, so if I'm in some place, I want to find a garden center there that will let us go and do a meetup at their garden center. I can't imagine they would turn that down. I mean, you guys or me would probably spend something while we're there. I can't imagine everybody would leave empty-handed. So, you know, that I think that's something I'll be adding in our travels next year. Okay, and you know, I look forward to meeting some of you that way. Somebody said, how do I cover so many plants with drip irrigation? Because I talked about drip irrigation, putting in drip irrigation last week here, and it's here, it just hasn't been put onto the water yet, but it's all here. I don't cover individual plants when I water the space. And so the drip lines are just running about every 14, 15 inches apart, back and forth through this bed. So I'm careful when I dig holes, because I occasionally do break it and put it back together. But I don't water individual plants. So you'll never see me with a water hose directly at a plant, unless I had ants at the bottom of it. Like I said earlier, I'm watering the space around it. I want the plant to go over there to get its water. I don't want it to sit right here and get its water. And that comes from the experience of landscaping for so many years. I go back and dig up plants where a plant had been watered and watered and watered, and you could just pull it out of the ground like it had just been planted 3 years later. So I figured out, you know, from that, you have to keep the whole area moist, not wet, but moist, and then the plants have to go over there to get water, you know, so their roots have to travel. And so, again, just not watering individual plants. I water an area, and based on based on the pressure that you would have and some other things. You can look up my drip irrigation videos. I don't know that they're that complete, but there's probably an irrigation supply place in your area that would help you out too if you were spending some money, and answer a couple questions as well about how long of a line that you can run for the volume of water and the pressure. So there's two parts. It's not only the amount of pressure you have from your line, but it's also the volume of water. Those two things combine to tell you how long of a drip line you can run on one zone. And then I just cover space, not individual plants. Okay, how far apart do male and female plants need to be? The wind just blew a door closed. How far apart do male and female plants have to be? So if you had like deciduous hollies that were, every time I say her name, she's always gonna look at me. If you had something like deciduous hollies, most people say around 50 feet apart. And so like a Cuba would be another one that we can get to bury if we have male and female plants, any plants like that. But a lot of some of the pollen that's wind-blown can go miles. Of course, most of these things are being bee pollinated or wasp pollinated or moth or butterfly or whatever pollinated, or hummingbirds. I mean, all kinds of things that pollinate. Outside of the things we call pollinators sometimes, they'll probably get pollinated as long as they're in the same garden, as long as your garden's like 3 acres. I think any place in your garden, keep in mind and I talk about this pretty frequently, if you only got those things that had flowers on them, pollinators you're not gonna be on the top of their list to be in your garden. I try to have, all my dahlias are over here next to the vegetable garden. And so, all of my vegetables everything in this garden is being pollinated because the whole garden is so inviting to so many different pollinators, if that makes sense. And so, add some flowers, add some vegetables, add lots of different types of flowering things to your garden, and anything you want pollinated will get pollinated. But I always think about somebody with one tomato plant on their balcony. Tomatoes are self-pollinating, and you can shake them and make them even better self-pollinating. But so tomatoes not a great example, but I do think about somebody with one type of vegetable plant on their balcony. you know, and they're waiting for a bee to come to it. Well, I mean, the bee's got a yard down the street with, you know, a lot more flowers than yours. And so the more appealing you can make it to more pollinators, the more likely it is to be pollinated. Okay, last question for this week. Best time to move a tree, really anytime it's dormant. So once they're fully asleep, most of the tree farms are digging probably pretty wide open at this point. If they've gotten some water, they may not be digging just because it might be a little dry, but for the most part, this is the time of year when tree farms are digging trees for field-grown tree production for landscapers. And so landscapers are wide open this time of year if they're doing bigger trees, putting in, you know, as they're going dormant. So that red bud behind me that's lost its leaves back there, anytime between now and, you know, late winter would be the best time of year to move it. It's the least stressful time. But for me, you know, if it's a small tree or something that's only been in the ground for 24 months or something, I'll move it almost any time. And so, you know, that's part of the question too. If it's an old established tree though, I probably would want to do it more in the best time. You know, that's how I would, or if it's a plant that's really already stressed and I'm moving it because it's stressed. Those are the plants I want to put in what is the best time to do it. But if it's healthy and happy and hadn't been in the ground that long, anytime. So there you go. That's this week's question and answer video. You can ask gardening questions down below and I'll pick from those next Sunday. Thanks for watching.